Let's try a thought experiment, a pretty big one. What happens the day after Iran's current government is no longer in power? It's a question that has massive implications, not just for the Middle East, but honestly for the entire world. So let's just dive right in. This is the big question we're tackling today. We're going to unpack what could happen if this huge political shift were to occur. And let me tell you, the answer is anything but simple. And the ripple effects would be felt globally. Okay, so first things first, and this is probably the most critical piece of the whole puzzle, the politics. What kind of government would actually take over? This one question pretty much sets the stage for everything else that follows. Yeah, our sources make it really clear that everything, and I mean everything from the economy to foreign relations, it all hangs on the nature of whatever new government comes into power. It is the absolute linchpin for Iran's future. You can really picture two very, very different roads Iran could go down. On one side, you have a future with a government that's more transparent, moderate, and ready to engage with the world. But the other path? Well, that could lead to a government that's just as strict, or maybe even worse, completely unstable. So what does that positive path actually look like? Well, we're talking about rebuilding trust on the world stage, creating some real stability that people can rely on, and basically shifting from a policy of confrontation to one of cooperation. It's a future built on partnership, not isolation. But on the flip side, that negative path, it's a pretty grim picture. You could see the same political crisis just continue, maybe with new faces in charge, and that could spark some serious internal conflicts, which have a nasty habit of spilling over borders and making the whole region even more unstable. Now, all this political talk isn't just happening in a vacuum, right? It has huge, huge impacts on the economy. The choice between those two paths we just talked about directly affects the wallets and well-being of millions. So let's look at how that could shape Iran's financial future. So to understand where it's going, you got to know where it is right now. Iran's economy is all about its massive oil and gas reserves. The problem is, international sanctions have really tied its hands, limiting how much it can sell and scaring off the foreign investment it needs to grow. And this leads to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? If those sanctions suddenly disappeared, what would happen? You hear a lot of talk about it being this magic fix, but would prosperity really show up overnight? And here's where we have to be realistic. The potential for an economic comeback is absolutely massive, no doubt. But our sources are really clear on this. It is not going to be a quick fix. Rebuilding a modern economy after years of being cut off from the world, that's a gigantic task. Think of it like a long road with a bunch of necessary stops. You can't just skip to the end. First, the sanctions have to go. That would hopefully open the door for international investment to come flooding in. But then that money has to be put to work, rebuilding roads, power grids, and modernizing industries. That's what creates jobs. And only then, after all that, can you start talking about real economic strength. This is a journey of years, not months. Okay, so we've looked inside Iran, at its politics, its economy, but of course Iran isn't on an island. Any change in its government would send shockwaves all through the Middle East, and probably well beyond. And this really matters because, as our sources point out, Iran's role in the region is just massive. It is a huge player. Whether as an enemy or an ally, what happens in Tehran has a direct impact on its neighbors and the global balance of power. So, who are the key players to keep an eye on? Well, there are three big ones. A new government could completely change the dynamic with its old rival, Saudi Arabia. And then there's its entrenched adversary, Israel. And, of course, the United States. A shift in any one of these incredibly complex relationships could reshape the entire Middle East. And you see, this is where it all connects. Better relationships with other countries aren't just about handshakes and treaties. They're fundamentally tied to the economy. When you get along with your neighbors, it encourages trade, investment, and stability. But if the tension continues, you're stuck with political conflict and economic pain. So after going through the politics, the economy, and the whole regional picture, what's the bottom line here? The main takeaway is that the road ahead for any new Iran would be incredibly complex. It's going to be a long, long journey. And that really brings us to the core conclusion from our sources. The idea that a new Iran will just instantly become this stable, wealthy nation, well, it's just not realistic. Even if everything goes right, the path to recovery is going to be long and difficult. So when you boil it all down, Iran's future really depends on four big things, and they all have to work together. You need a new government with smart policies. You need the rest of the world to be willing to engage.
You obviously need to get rid of those crippling sanctions, and maybe most important of all, you have to keep things stable at home. Success really hinges on getting all four of those things to line up. And that leaves us right here with the big open question. Iran is standing at a crossroads with two profoundly different futures ahead of it. The path it ends up taking won't just decide the fate of its people, it's going to send ripples across the entire globe. The only thing we know for sure is that everybody will be watching.